Hello. I'm continuing now with reciting the book that I wrote called Women Should Run the Countries, Mostly Men Should Run the Economies, and 14 to 17-year-olds should get the vote. Okay, this is part 6. All right, I already read the first, my quote-unquote big 6. I also have a medium 6 and a small 6, so I will start reading the medium 6 now. Okay, this is the book I'm reading now. Okay, that is the big 6. These are the ones that I think are crucial for a decent country to have. I also have a medium 6 and a small 6. These are obviously less important to me than the big 6, but I still feel they are important and should be integrated into countries, constitutions, laws, as soon as possible. The medium, obviously, before the small. And now the medium 6. Number 7, women and a few men must raise their preschoolers themselves. Daycares must never be funded, subsidized by government again. 8, the nation must pass a balanced budget every single one of their fiscal years. 9, no more government assistance to anyone past 75 plus 1 day years of age. This law would only apply to those 50 or possibly younger and under the day the law came into effect. 10, income capital gains taxation must be simplified. 11, military spending per fiscal year, FY, is 1% maximum. 12, far more serious sentences for violent criminals. Number 7, women and a few men must raise their preschoolers themselves. Daycares must never be funded, subsidized by government again. Oh, first off, if it sounds going forward like I'm letting men off of the hook, I am not. It is just that I think women are the better parents, and I expect more from them. Better from them than just tossing their children into daycare. But to the men who are going along with what the mothers of their children are doing by throwing their infants into daycare, just change the word bitches in this rant into bastards, because you are almost, if not just as at fault as they are. Okay, this is where I'm going to vent because I feel very strongly about this subject. And I mean vent. This is going to be ugly. Vent beginning. What the fuck is wrong with you mothers who throw your preschoolers into daycare? And I say mothers because mothers are clearly far better and have a far closer bond with their children than most fathers do. Let me type that in. I don't give a shit if fathers disagree with me, because they are wrong. Yes, there are exceptions, but generally the mother is the better parent. There is a bond with birth and carrying a child that fathers can never know or fully understand. Heck, even mothers of adopted children are better parents. Even mothers of adopted children are better parents than men, I should say. Just add that. Excuse me. They are more protective. They have more protective instincts for the young. It should say, for their young. They are far more expressive to the child, which is obviously more important. Women, generally, are far better suited to raise children than men are. So mothers, and the fathers too that go along with this shit, don't you give a fuck about your little ones? Are you so mind-numbingly ignorant that you are not aware of the fact that the preschool years are by far the most important and formative years of a child's life? Just fucking search engine it, and it's all over the place. Now that I'll put this information. This is the first time I've written a book, so I've already tried to edit it, but obviously I need to edit it more. Excuse me. Now that you might have done that and have educated yourself to some extent, why the fuck are you doing this to your children? Listen, I assume you think you are the best possible parent for your child. If you don't, what the fuck are you doing raising one or more in the first place? But assuming you believe you are the best possible person for your child, hello, would it not then be the best thing for your child to have the best possible person with them as much as possible? I guess you don't think so. And what about unconditional love? Don't you think it is critical for your infant to be surrounded by people that unconditionally love them? Yes? Well, your daycare people do not unconditionally love them. How could they? Please tell me that you are not so delusional as to con yourself into believing that daycare workers love your child, let alone love them unconditionally. Have you conned yourself into believing that so you feel less guilty when you drop off your child most mornings? You selfish bitch. And yes, you are a selfish bitch if you are dropping off your children almost every weekday at daycare. If you are wealthy enough to stay home and raise your child yourself, but instead you throw the poor thing into daycare so you can continue your, quote, career, unquote, then you are staggeringly selfish. Hey, bitch, I apparently got news for you. Raising a preschooler is a full-time job. You cannot half-ass it and do it well. Impossible. The task requires your full attention. If you do otherwise, congratulations. You are an ignorant parent. Oh, let me guess, you rich bitch. You are an amazing woman. At least that is what all your girlfriends tell you. You are the exact same person, to make each other feel better. You can both raise a baby and have a career. No, bitch, you cannot. Actually, I am wrong. You can do both. It's just that you cannot do both well. Like that. Raising a child must be your full-time job while they are preschool. Here is a simple test for you selfish mothers. I should say mothers, not mother. If your child spends more of his or her waking hours with anyone other than you, the child's father, or his or her, maybe if they're exceptional, grandparents, during an average week, congratulations, you are a failure as a mother. Failure. Now, as I started above, if you are wealthy, stated above. Actually, I typed it. I didn't state it. Well, I did state it, but if you're reading it, I typed it. Now, as I typed above, if you are wealthy enough to be able to stay home with your child, and you don't, you are semi-scum in my eyes. What the fuck is wrong with you? You have the money. Why the fuck are you not raising your child yourself? Too fucking lazy? Too selfish? Too drunk? Too high? What? This is your child, for fuck's sakes. The one that completely depends on you and needs you. Does that not matter to you? Obviously not. People like you make me unliterally sick. You can easily afford to raise your preschoolers, but you don't. And you find some way to justify it in your own minds. You are not raising your child. You are raising a glorified pet. If you were treating your child as a child, you would realize the child needs unconditional love, and only you, dad, maybe grandparents can give that. And you should be the best person for him or her. Assuming you know that, then the fact that you are shirking that responsibility tells me loud and clear that you think of your child as a glorified pet, that you do not have the emotional capacity to raise your child properly. Congratulations, again, you are a pathetic parent. Now, what about middle-class mothers? Women who could stay at home with their newborns, but would have to make some sacrifices to do so. My thought? So fucking what? What is more important? You buying a fucking house now instead of 6 years from now? And or being able to afford a nicer SUV? Or raising your child properly? The answer should be fucking obvious. I said fucking a lot here. And it ain't the first one. Hello? Your child should be the most important thing in your life. If they are not, why the fuck did you have him or her? To keep up with the Joneses? To get your mother off your back for a grandchild? Why? I will tell you what the two major reasons should be why you want a child. Because you want a child, and because you believe that you can offer your child a loving, wonderful environment. It doesn't fucking matter how rich you are. As long as you have the basics, you can offer your child a great preschool life. So just put off your financial superficial dreams for 5 years and raise your child the way you would want to have been raised by a loving parent, not a fucking stranger, no matter how familiar they are to the little one. Who is not... What the fuck? This sentence is terrible. I hope I fixed it. So just put off your financial superficial dreams for 5 years and raise your child the way you would want to have been raised when you were a preschooler, by a loving parent, parent, and not by a. I got to change it. This is the first book I ever wrote, and not by a fucking stranger, no matter how familiar they are to the little one, who is not paid enough and whom does not even love your child, let alone unconditionally. Stop being so selfish. Now to poor mothers. I bet you think you get off scot-free because you are poor. Nope. First, if you are so poor that you cannot afford to raise your child during his or her preschool years, then why the fuck did you have the child in the first place? And save the, I don't believe in abortion stuff. I don't care. You could always have had the child and put up for adoption. My mother did that for her first child. And I don't give a shit if that would make you sad. You should have fucking thought of that before you got pregnant. No birth control is foolproof. You have to fucking consider that. You consider what will happen if you do have sex and get pregnant. You don't want to? I don't give a shit. Do it anyway. You say you want to raise your child, yet you are not even responsible enough to think of the consequences of having sex. The guy can be an asshole, just run away after sex. His problem solved. But you are stuck with the fetus. So think about it before your girlfriend, so think about that before your boyfriend who claims he loves you so much wants to fuck you. But anyway, now you have a child and you say you cannot live on the money you get from welfare if you raise the child full time. Then just move to the state province that does pay you enough welfare to raise your child. And when they start school, you can move back to where your family friends are and save the I would be homesick crap. I don't fucking care. Your child should be worth it. If you truly love your child enough, you will do it. I have a niece, whom I love very much, who did that. There was no way she was going to toss her child in daycare. So she went on welfare, took a lot of shit from other mothers, and raised her son right. Now he's a very well-adjusted little guy with a wonderful relationship with his mom. He not only loves her, but he clearly respects her because she put the time in. She sacrificed gladly for him. So I'm not buying that you have to resort to daycare. There may be some instances where you do, but in North America, Europe, not many. Suck it up and do what is best for your little one. You can go back to work once. Once your child enters school full time. By the way, that is another thing. If you bitches bastards who threw your children in daycare because you were too fucking selfish and self-centered to raise them yourselves, and save the we put our child in a fantastic daycare bullshit. I don't care how fantastic it is. They do not love your children. And they certainly don't love your children unconditionally. Of course. Neither do you, apparently, so. If you throw your children in daycare, they will not respect you as much. Anyway, if you throw your children in daycare, they will not respect you as much, as I said. And do you know what? They shouldn't. If you could find any possible way to raise them, but didn't do it, then your child should not respect you. You did little to help them during their most formative years. You caved. So you are not worthy of their respect. And they will have friends, and at least some of them will probably have parents, a mother, whom actually raised them during their most formative preschool years. I got per-school years. Preschool years. They put in the time and the effort. And yes, raising a child full-time is no picnic. It can be incredibly draining. But it needs to be done if you give a shit enough to do it right. So when your child talks to these children with parents who did put in the time and the love, they will naturally, whether they tell you or not, wonder why you did not bother. They will probably ask you, and you will tell them the same bullshit you tell everyone else, that you tell. Everyone does that. Modern women do both work and home life. I couldn't afford it, even though that is bullshit. You just convinced yourself you could not afford it, almost certainly. Or whatever crap you tell yourself, your other lazy, selfish bitch mother friends who throw their children in daycare as well. But your children will not buy it. They might initially, but eventually it will probably sink into them that you simply did not raise them because you did not want to enough. Period. They will figure that out, and they will lose a ton of respect for you. And they bloody well should If you are not prepared to make the sacrifices necessary to give your children the best possible emotional start in life, you don't deserve that child's respect. Period. Now, there is only one example of a parent throwing their child into daycare that I can live with. If the parent fully understands and freely admits that they are a lousy parent. They sincerely believe that the people in the daycare will treat their child better than they will. Of course, you have to wonder why the fuck this person had a child in the first place, but whatever. The only way this is acceptable is if this mother tells the world, and especially her child, that they are a lousy mother. It is critical that a child not believe a parent is better than they really are. So when the parent screws up, the child does not blame themselves because they wrongfully think, think that since the parents are perfect, then the reason things went wrong is their fault somehow. So if there is an idiot who has a child and keeps the child, even though they freely admit they suck at parenting, and then tosses the child in daycare because they genuinely feel that the child is better off, and tells the child all this, then in that lone situation, I give the parent credit. You clearly care more about the child than you do your pride. And not only does your child have a better upbringing, but since you are telling the child the truth, they will not get all emotionally confused about it. They will not like that their mother is not a great mother, but they will eventually respect the fact that the mother had the guts and the decency to admit that. Rant, more or less, over. Fucking lazy ass, self-centered bitches, I guess it's not over, whom think they are so fucking great because they can be a career woman and a mom when there is no fucking way they can. You fucking bitch losers. Especially those of you who can easily afford to raise your children and throw them in daycare and or get them a nanny anyway. You rich bitch, self-centered, fucking pathetic excuse for parents. And the same goes to the fucking fathers who go along with this shit. You should also be ashamed of yourselves, you useless pricks. Okay, now the rant might be over. This crap has to end. Not my rant, the daycare. Children must not be thrown at daycares. And I am not faulting daycares. I am quite sure some of them suck. But I'm also quite sure that many of them are good, great. They do an extremely important job. And many of them probably do it very well. And hats off to them, those that do it well. You people are not paid remotely enough considering how important your jobs are. But I despise the fact that they even need to exist. The governments are largely to blame, and governments are largely to blame. If governments stopped paying subsidizing daycares, they would diminish in number, and the selfish bitches bastards would actually have to get off their ever fatter asses and raise their own children. So it is critical that government must stop financing, subsidizing daycares. I don't give a shit whether people like that or not. It must be done. Most things I do not want to go back to the old days, like more racism, sexism, misogyny, etc. But the tradition of a child's parents actually raising them during their preschool years is a tradition I want to revisit. I think it is critical to humanity's future. Long-term, I think it is critical to humanity's long-term psychological future. It cannot be a good thing that hundreds of millions of children are being virtually raised by strangers. All the children that will grow up to be fucked up thanks to these lazy, selfish parents is now just starting to materialize as the millennials are really the first generation who largely were raised in daycare. And yes, raised is the right fucking term. If a child spent most of its waking preschool hours with someone other than their parent, then they were not primarily raised by that parent. Generation Z, though, is probably the first generation that was mostly raised by daycare employees. Though I could be wrong, and it was millennials. I'm a Generation Xer, by the way. Daycare was just starting out then. Maybe this explains why life has generally gotten so shallow since about 2000, the year 2000. People living off of debt, progressives wanting the government to make everything better, refusing to take responsibility for themselves. The right showing lots of xenophobia and also embracing cheap debt. The media going down the dumper. Don't even get me started about how popular music has turned light, fluffy, superficial, and too effeminate since about 2000 or so, though it was tolerable until about 2010. Society as a whole has clearly gone downhill since the turn of the century. It has gotten very weak and superficial and self-addicted. Debt addicted. Are all the selfish millennial Generation Y parents throwing their children in daycare? So these poor children have far less unconditional love during their most formative years, unlike my and earlier generations. The primary reason for this? I don't know. But there must be a reason, and that sounds as good as any. And for those women asking, how can I raise my child during their preschool years if I'm running the country? Simple. You raise your children until they are 6 and then start running the country by becoming a cop, soldier, doctor, nurse, bureaucrat, politician. Or you start doing those things and take 5 years off to raise your child properly and then go back to work, running the country. Ladies, gals, women, you must stop throwing your children in daycare. This is wrong and harmful to them. Don't believe me? Just look it up. And do not consult government experts on this. Governments have a vested interest in you throwing your children in daycare. The more women who throw their children in daycare, I realize that it is a rather cold way of describing placing a child in daycare. But it is meant to be because I think daycare can be a pretty cold place for most children, no matter how happy they claim they are. The more women who are working and the more money they are making and the more taxes that they are paying and the more power the government has. I don't like that sentence. The more women who are working, then the more money they are making and the more taxes they are paying, and thus the more power the government has. So do not count on the government to say anything but daycare is fantastic. They adore daycares. All that tax money they would not get were it not for daycares. By the way, this is another reason why it is imperative that everyone must have a minimum living standard guaranteed to them, so that women who sincerely want to raise their children but feel the financial burden is too great will have an option, guaranteed. They will have an apartment for her and her family, enough food, water, clothing, free internet, free public transit, all in a safe, relatively quiet, clean environment. All the basics guaranteed. With this guaranteed minimum living standards, people will have more options. And to be blunt, less excuses for not raising their infants themselves. So women, when you get the political power, you must stop subsidizing daycares and make people, especially women, raise their infants again. Surely you can see how this would be almost nothing but a good thing. Ladies, you are the key. And I think I know what happened as to why you started throwing your little ones into daycare. You were treated like shit for thousands of years, like you were inferior, subhuman. That was obviously terribly wrong and damaging to society. Now, in the last generation or two, you have finally begun to get equality, and that is fantastic. The world desperately needs you in more powerful positions. It always has. But what happened is you suddenly could start working at jobs you liked, not just typing and cleaning and whatnot. Not that there is anything wrong with those jobs, but they are not always the most stimulating, well paid. Suddenly, you could be doctors, lawyers, engineers, and whatever else you wanted, almost. So you went a bit overboard. You fell in love with the idea of working full-time and not being stuck at home. Homemaker became an almost insulting thing to call a woman. So you fully embraced working all the time. And since raising children was stopping you from enjoying your newfound freedom, you found a compromise. Daycare. You could do both, be a mother and have a career. Actually, you couldn't, but society convinced you that you could. As well, the average pay of the males went down relative to the economy. So the only way to have all the toys that you had previously enjoyed was for both people to work. So it was a combination of the two things, newfound freedom and economic, quote, need, unquote. And I understand that. I just typed it. But this is hurting your children. I mean, think about it. Assuming you had a solid mother growing up, which would you rather live like? Being tossed into daycare while you're still a baby almost every weekday, or being raised by your loving mother? If you do not say the latter, then either you were in denial or you had a lousy mother yourself. You do the most important job on the planet, raising a child. Nothing is close to that in importance. And hopefully nothing is as important to you either. Okay, that was 7, now 8. The nation must pass a balanced budget every single one of their fiscal years. During the 1990s, that was SOP, standard operating procedure, for most civilized countries. It was assumed that a responsible government would live within its means. Well, after 2000, that seemed to go semi out the window. And after the Great Recession, it went right out the window. And now, thanks to the COVID-19 paranoia, it has gone into orbit. Progressives seem to think balanced budget are a naughty word, and the rest of the left-right has caved on fiscal responsibility almost completely. This has to end. You simply cannot live beyond your means forever. Look at Japan. According to One Road Research, I'll put a link in the description. Start again. This has to end. You simply cannot live beyond your means forever. Look at Japan. According to One Road Research, and this is an article from, as I said, I'll put a link in the description, from Forbes.com. Japan's yearly debt servicing cost will equal all of their tax revenue by 2041. This was as of 2017. So in 21 years, if this is true, that means every penny the Japanese would give the government in taxes would go towards debt servicing only. That is like every penny you make in take-home pay going towards just the interest payments on all your debt. No money left for anything else. Now, Japan is, by quite a bit, the country with the highest debt to GDP ratio in the world. But the weird thing is they are not even slowing down their spending. It is like their governments are totally unaware of the train wreck they are facing in a generation. And eventually, the rest of the world will face this dilemma if they don't start balancing their budgets. And besides this, I have long believed that if you cannot post a balanced budget, especially if there is no major declared war going on, then you are a failure as a politician. You are obviously so weak and pathetic that you simply cannot help yourself but buy votes with greater spending, whether your country can afford it or not. Any idiot can live beyond his or her means. That takes almost no skill whatsoever. The skill is living within your means. So I say that there must be a balanced budget amendment addition to all constitutions. And again, one with severe consequences for the politicians themselves, including jail time if they are not followed. And the only exception might be if the country in question has declared war against another country. Of course, then I worry that politicians will find a loophole by officially declaring war against another country just to get around the law, but assuring the country they declared war against that it is not a real one, just a political one. You can never give politicians a way out, or they will eventually take it, especially male ones. It was 8, now 9. No more government nope, this is going to be controversial if anybody ever reads it. No more government, here's it, no more government assistance to anyone past 75 plus a day years of age. This law, this law only would apply to those 50 or possibly younger and under the day the law came into effect. I assume that out of all the laws rules I'm proposing here, that other than the all-female government law, political positions, and or the no daycare law, this one will stir up the most controversy. Maybe even the most, period. This is something I've thought about for a long time, but we know that the world is getting older. We also know, I spelled that wrong, it's no with a K and a W, know that medical science is finding ways to keep people alive much longer than they used to just 50 years ago. According to the United Nations, the average U.S. life expectancy in 2020 is 78.93 years from birth. Now, it dropped from 2014 to 2018, but started going up again in 2019. And the UN estimates that the average American's life expectancy at birth by 2060 will be 84.60 years. I'll put a link in the description. And that is just the average. If things keep going like this, a higher and higher percentage of people's income will be going just to keeping the aged alive. And that is the thing. People are living longer, but not really better. Medical science seems to be finding new ways to keep people alive, but not to making them healthy for longer. So what is the point? Keeping people alive just because they're afraid to die? When they have no chance of ever becoming active members of society again? And sorry, but to me, sitting around at 85 and being debilitated and just waiting to die is not an active member of society. It's a member of society, but hardly active. Something has to give. And what if medical science finds a way to keep people alive to 90 and 100, but still with no more mobility or independence, just alive. The cost to keep sedentary seniors alive could skyrocket. We already know that about half of all medical costs the country pays per year goes towards people over 60. Maybe this is fine for you, not to me. It is unsustainable, and it is not fair that people are just kept alive for year after year doing virtually nothing, all paid for by the working class, being forced to take more and more of their paychecks just to keep these people alive longer. Again, maybe this is fine for you, not for me. My solution? Governments should stop providing any assistance of any kind to people once they hit 75. Will most people think that is cruel? Yep, probably. But that is too bad. Government is not supposed to be warm and cuddly. Government is supposed to provide the basic necessities of life for its citizens, but keep old, virtually useless people who will never get better alive for as long as is humanly possible, no matter the cost. But though I do think government should help those whom are disabled and under 75, because I think every human has the right to a full life, and 75 to me is full, I do not think governments have an obligation to take care of people who have already led a full life. As well, once you are past 75, there's very little chance you're going to work. Yes, people do work past 75, but far and away most people do not, especially if they are not running their own business. Business says. Plus people who are living so long that governments theoretically could be, plus people now are living so long the governments theoretically could be looking after semi-useless people for decades, all at incredibly high medical expenses required. What is the point? Let's be blunt here. What good is a retired senior who needs government benefits? He, she is virtually useless. What can they give? Their wisdom? If their wisdom is so amazing, then why don't they write a book and or dictate videos and put them online so the whole world can gain from their wisdom? But once they have done that, what is left? Their wisdom is already out there for the world to see. They cannot work much. They are adding nothing to the economy at all. They are costing taxpayers huge amounts of funds to house them, feed them, and especially to pay for their ever-increasing medical bills. And what do all these taxpayers, tax dollars spent, get in return? Nothing but the aforementioned wisdom. This is a terrible trade-off. And with humanity getting older and older, living longer and longer, this trade-off is getting worse and worse. No, as I said above, this is unsustainable and must be stopped. By the way, let me say some of my best friends are seniors. I find the average senior to be much more pleasant to talk to than the average non-adult senior. My life is better off for knowing these seniors than it would be otherwise. But that does not change the reality of the situation. People over 75 are generally a huge drain on many countries. Now, I'm not saying seniors should be taken out and shot at 75. I am simply saying that the government should not in any way support them after 75. If at 75 they want to live longer, they can use their own savings, they can get help from charities, or they could possibly get help from their family. But the government would no longer assist them in any way except to assist their suicides if suicide was legal. I'm going to change something here. Families. Just look at COVID-19. I live in North America. If you look at the New York State Department of Health COVID-19 fatalities page online, I doubt it will still be up by the time you read this, but just in case it is, I'll leave a link in the description. Sorry about that. You had to hear me figuring it all out. I thought I'd turned off the recording. Anyway, what I've added to it is, and yes, according to that big-time British expert, Professor Neil Ferguson, and I'll put a link in the description. According to him, excuse me, this is from an article on March 25th this year, 2020, in The Telegraph by Sarah Knapton, Knapton. Like I said, I'll put a link in the description. He said, a quote from the article, 2/3 of people who die from coronavirus in the next 9 months are likely to have died from this year from other causes. That is terrible governing, no matter what. I better set this up a bit better. The nonsense of protecting seniors at any cost has to stop. Protecting young people at any cost, I am 100% for that. They have not had a chance at a full life yet, but seniors have. They have lived a full life. They have had their chance. Destroying an economy to save people who already had a full life, especially just to keep almost all of them alive for just another year or two at most, that is terrible governing, no matter what the weak masses said. And yes, according to that big-time British expert, Professor Neil Ferguson, 2/3 of people who die from coronavirus in the next 9 months are likely to have died this year from other causes. This is from an article, blah, 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 I told you this. And it has to stop. Now back to government's cutting off seniors at 75 plus 1 day. Look, seniors have had their entire adult lives to save up for retirement. If 50 plus years is not enough time, tough. Also, if the weak masses are so disturbed by a law like this, then if it passed, they could throw a bunch of their own money at charities that specifically cater to seniors over 75 who need help to live longer. Besides, it's their money either way. Either their tax dollars go to keeping the 75 plus seniors alive, or you put that money into charity and get a tax write-off to boot. Alternatively, you can do what people used to do, take in their old people and look after them themselves. It's up to you, but the government must stop looking after 75 plus seniors, 75 plus year old seniors. So let's say the law passed. How would it go? 75 years of age is a full life, and after that, the government will no longer spend 1 penny to keep you alive, take care of you. After that, again, this is not for people 75 now. This is for 50-year-olds. This is if once the law passed, it would be only for 50 people 50 and old and younger. Now this, I think I explained this later though. And after that, the government will no longer spend 1 penny to keep you alive, take care of you. After that, you're on your own, and either you, your family, friends, or charity employment pension has to take care of you. Now, this obviously would not apply to people, well, I did, people whom are 75 when the law passes. They were told their whole lives the government would look after them, so they had no need to save up for retirement. You cannot just go back on that promise, as they will have little no way to earn more funds. So the law would only apply to those under 50 the day the law would take effect. Those 50 plus would not be affected. This would give those under 50 time to save up for their post-75 retirement. Though, to be honest, I have no desire to live past 75 at all. If I cannot be healthy, active and healthy and completely free of dependence on others for my health, outside of some prescription drugs, forget it. My greatest fear in life is to be an invalid for years and years and to die that way. To have to be fed, have my diaper changed, and goodness knows what else. Maybe people that live like that like it. I would despise it, especially if it was permanent and I was old. To me, 75 is more than enough. If I get to 75 relatively healthy, that is good enough for me. So how would I see someone die at 75 if they chose to end their life at 75? On someone's 75th birthday, they would have a celebration of their life. They would go over with their friends and family all that they did and all that they enjoyed, and even if they have some regrets. But generally, it would be a positive time, a time to celebrate a full life, a joyous day. And the next day, assuming suicide was legal, they would go to a suicide clinic, and there they would be surrounded by loved ones and painlessly die. Now that to me is a heck of a lot better than living in misery, waiting for the final day, probably in a palliative care ward, slowly deteriorating, everyone miserable and unhappy around you as they are slowly losing their loved one. My mother went that way, and it was awful. Anyway, like it or not, this is what I think should be law. that no one over 75 plus 1 day should be supported in any way by the government. If they want to end their life, then great. They can do so with dignity. And if they want to live on, fine. But you must pay for your expenses through other means, your finances and or friends, family and or charity. Besides a probably much better death, what would be the benefits? First, one would not have to worry about saving for an unknown ending date. Instead of having to work your tail off trying to build up some huge nest egg and that can see you through to 80, 85, 90 or longer, you can save enough just for 75 and not have to work as hard or spend that extra money and not have to work as hard, or, that doesn't make sense, and not have to work as hard and or spend that extra money any way you want. 2. Second, government health care services. I'm going to change that. Want to wish. Second, government healthcare services, make another comma there, would probably save a bundle since they could plan for exactly how long those patients in their care will live, maximum. This could save taxpayers a bundle and lower support costs for said government health care. Plus, since the older one gets past 60, the higher average healthcare costs are, the higher, This will save lots of taxpayer dollars since those super high costs 75 plus years will not have to be covered any longer. No matter what, for certain, it will save costs. Third, if you plan to die at 75 and have private health insurance, the cost to you would surely be much lower since the insurance company will know exactly the maximum amount of time they will have to provide you with insurance protection. Finally, to me, 75 is enough. Surely that is a full life, and I see no reason why taxpayers must fork over huge amounts of their pay to keep people whom they will never meet existing longer and longer, when that senior is no longer capable of being a contributing active member of society. Sorry folks, I assume most of you think this is cruel, but to me, 75 is long enough. That was 9, now 10. Income capital gains taxation must be simplified. According to an article from gobankingrates.com, and I'll put a link in the description, only 8.5% of Americans actually calculate their own taxes using the IRS Internal Revenue Service forms. That's ridiculous. Not that I am knocking most Americans on this, not at all. I am knocking the U.S. tax system. Obviously, the fact that so few Americans file their own taxes without any help at all shows just how incredibly difficult it is. And I am quite sure that goes for a lot of countries as well. And that is unacceptable and unnecessary. So what do I propose? That all nations go to a simple tax system. Not that I'm claiming to be the first to come up with this. I assume I am not. My idea is the following. Income and capital gains tax rates become identical. That's 1. 2. No deductions except for capital losses and charitable contributions. 3. New principal residences bought after this tax law goes into effect are no longer counted as tax-free for its capital gains. If someone already has a home, they denote as their principal residence for taxes, and they bought it before the tax law went into effect, they may keep the tax-free status for as long as they own the home. 4. Tax rates will be adjusted so the possible loss of deductions does not increase the average tax owed every year, especially for the middle-lower classes. 5. Remove all taxation below the poverty line. I will explain my justification for each one. 1. Income and capital gains tax rates become identical. That these two are different is little more than a way for the wealthy to pay lower taxes. The mega wealthy usually make the vast majority of their income through capital gains. Yet, in most countries I'm familiar with, maybe all of them, emphasis there, the capital gains rates are always lower than income tax rates. In some cases, they are far lower. This is utter nonsense, as most poor people have little capital holdings, and middle-class people usually make by far most of their money through income. So why the heck should the wealthy get lower tax rates? Well, the wealthy will tell you that they have to be lower, or people will not buy capital investments like stocks and real estate as often. Bunk. In some cases in America, the capital gains rate is the same as the income tax rate. And that does not seem to stop anyone buying stocks or real estate or other capital gain type investments. The reason capital gains are less than income usually is for one reason only: to give the wealthy a break that they do not need. Said it. By the way, if some of you are wondering why you occasionally hear very wealthy people saying that income tax rates should be higher for people like them, it's probably not because they are so generous. After all, if they think they should be morally paying higher taxes, why not just send the government more money every year? None of them will. No, they say this to sound decent or honorable, but it's baloney. They're saying it because they probably make almost all their income from capital gains. Ask them to also raise capital gains tax rates, and they will probably freak out. Put but on this. No deduction. 2. No deductions except for capital losses and charitable contributions. Whoops. This is for simplicity mostly, but deductions are just silly. They are a way that the government hands you little crumbs to make themselves sound kind. Why don't today's governments just, spelt that wrong, just get rid of the deductions and lower the tax rates to make up the difference? Because they can only do that once. Once it's done, they cannot keep lowering the tax rates, or they will lose their precious tax revenues that they love so much, and that gives them power. But governments can invent all kinds of new deductions to make themselves sound like they care. Obviously, they don't 90+% of the time. As for charitable contributions, these are essential, as without them, the wealthy will not be as generous. And wealthy donations make up the vast majority of private donations in most countries I'm familiar with. These charities simply cannot afford to lose these donations, so charitable contributions have to stay as deductions. 3. New principal residences bought after this tax law. Just a sec. Start again. 3. New principal residences bought after the tax law goes into effect are no longer counted as tax-free for their capital gains. Once again, if someone already has a home they denote as their principal residence for taxes, and they bought it before the tax law went into effect, they may keep the tax-free status for as long as they own the home. A lot of people won't like this one, to say the least. And I'm prepared to be flexible on it, but I just do not think that it's fair that homeowners get a huge tax deduction while home rent, sounds better, whilst or while? I'm going to put whilst. Whilst home renters get nothing. I realize it is an incentive to buy houses, but I seriously doubt losing the capital deduction on principal residences will kill the housing market. And even if it did hurt it, so what? Consumers will just spend money on other things. It often makes me chuckle when people freak out about a certain area of an economy possibly losing money when people do not buy those certain things as much as they used to. But all that means is any job losses in that sector will probably be made up in another sector, as the money consumers spent on that sector will now be spent on another sectors, and more people will be hired in that sector. It's not like the consumers just flush the money down the drain. It has to go somewhere. Obviously, this is based on the assumption that the percentage of the money they used to buy that other thing will be the same or greater for the new things they buy with that money. That doesn't make sense. I'll say that again. Obviously, this is based on the assumption that the new things they are buying are both domestic and not foreign manufactured in nature. I am not against the housing market. I have bought and sold over a dozen homes myself so far in my life. But I am not at all a believer in the government giving incentives to any industry. People should buy homes with no incentive whatsoever from governments. And again, I do not like that renters get no tax benefit while homeowners get a huge one. Finally, I think home ownership is overrated as an investment. Generally speaking, the equity markets stocks outperform the housing markets, and that is before And that is before the crazy central bank propped up nonsense that has gone on in the equity market since 2007 or so. Well, that'd be more like 2009 or so, actually. Though this can depend on the country in question. I'm referring to North America, as I know those economies the best. Why own a house and have all the worries and hassles of home ownership, repairs, neighbors, land tax, I should say neighbors you don't like, land tax, etc. It should be land taxes, etc. Why own a house and have all the worries and hassles of home ownership, repairs, neighbors you don't like, land taxes, etc., when you can rent the same size home and put the money you save into equities? Plus, you don't have to worry about lousy neighbors, a deteriorating neighborhood, repairs, land taxes, or much else. You don't like your home anymore? Give up the lease and move to one you like better. Rephrase that. When the lease ends, or you sublet the property and move to one you like better. Of course, I doubt most people feel this way, as they are convinced that owning their own home is the only way to go. But as I typed earlier, I am open to flexibility on this part. 4. Tax rates. Tax rates will be adjusted so the possible loss of deductions does not increase the average tax owed each year, especially for the middle lower classes. This should explain itself. This simply means that any losses that most people will feel in deduction reductions should be made up by a general lowering of tax rates, especially for middle lower end tax rates. Didn't say that very well. 5. Remove all taxation below the poverty line. To me, this is just common sense. Why tax the poor? They have little money to start with, and now you're asking them to go to all the trouble, in most countries at present, of doing their tax returns just so they can give the government more money that they barely have anyway? Life is tough enough for the poor. Let's make it easier on them and not force them to pay taxes on their meager income. So how would you do your taxes in this system? Do you taxes? Do your taxes. Where's the R? There. Taxes in this system. First, you find out how much you made in both capital gains and income and total them all up, as they will have the same tax rates. Second, you deduct from this total any capital losses or charitable contributions, whatever percentage allowed you have made that year. Third, you figure out how much you owe in each bracket. Fourth, you add them up and you have your total taxes owed to the federal government. Something like this. Say you made $80,000 in income and $10,000 in capital gains. That equals $90,000 total income. Say you have no capital losses and you have nothing to, in case you don't know, capital losses are, say you sold a stock and you lost money on it. That's a capital loss. Or say you sold your house and you lost money on it. That's a capital loss. And you can carry, most places that I know of, you can carry that forward as long as you want. So if you had $10,000 from you probably know this already. And but if you don't, if you have a capital loss, you can carry that forward forever. So if you had a $10,000 capital loss on a house you sold, and you made $10,000 next year, you can cancel each other out and you have no taxes. And you can carry that capital loss forward as long as you want. You can only use it once, but you can carry it forward as long as you want. At least in most countries I know of. Anyway, that equals $90,000 total income. Say you have no capital losses. And you gave nothing to charity that year. Naughty, naughty. Next, say the tax brackets are as follows. 0 to 12,000, 0%. 12,001 to 50,000, 15%. 50,001 to 100,000, 25%. So the first 12,000 is zip. The next 38K is 5,700. In taxes. The last 40K is 10,000 in taxes. You total them up and you owe the tax department of your country 15,700. You are done your taxes for the previous year. Let's assume you have no income capital gains taxes for your province state. I doubt that would take you 5 minutes once you figure out your income totals. This is how easy, simple it should always be. Okay, that's 10. 11. Military spending per fiscal year, FY, is 1% maximum. According to the World Bank, I'll put a link in the description. According to the World Bank, the average country in the world spent 2.141% of its GDP on military spending. This to me is silly. We have no more Cold War. We have no major war brewing. Why waste money on things that are not needed? Now, I am not some mega dove. I was in my country's reserves. I just think of military spending when the world is relatively calm in terms of major conflicts brewing as a waste. I think I need a couple of commas there. 1% of GDP is plenty. No doubt neoconservatives vehemently disagree. They seem to have never met a military budget that they thought was enough. I tell you, in my opinion, the biggest military danger in the world today is not from major countries or terrorists. It's from neoconservatives, and the military-industrial complex. They both seem to do anything they can to increase military spending, at almost any cost. Peace is their enemy. War is their friend. As hideous as central banks are to a free economy, neocons in the MIC, military-industrial complex, are similar to peace. The fact that President Eisenhower's final speech to the nation of his presidency back in 1960, before my time, but I have seen the video of it, was largely a warning to people to beware of the military-industrial complex. And he was a former military general. That is very impressive to me. If you're interested and have not seen it, I recommend you watch it on YouTube, Dailymotion, etc. It's almost amazing to see a U.S. president, whom used to be a major general in the military, no less, warn people about too much military spending. To me, it's one of the great speeches in American political history. I also have ideas about spreading the load of military spending amongst friendly nations. I will deal with that in the UN 2.0 chapter. That's 11, 12. 12. Far more serious sentences for violent criminals. This is something I feel very strongly about. I'm quite sure that I'm not the only person who gets frustrated and angry when someone gets convicted of a violent crime like rape and then gets a minimal sentence of just a few years. And even that, we know, will be cut short with, quote, good behavior, unquote. I should say that I do not think of jail as a place of punishment or for rehabilitation. Also, I do not think humans are wise enough to decide what is and what is not just punishment for every crime committed. And I am not big on rehabilitation either. The concept seems fine, but the reality seems too convoluted. Finally, often, the desire for rehabilitation will outweigh the need to get a violent criminal off the streets. No, I look upon prison sentences as simply protecting the public, nothing else. Frankly, I think there should be almost no jail time for nonviolent criminals and massive jail time for violent criminals, especially serious ones. Now, I am no psychiatrist, but I believe that if someone is capable of seriously injuring, deliberately, or raping someone, I find it very hard to believe, spelled believe wrong, another E, believe that they will lose that capability. Either they are capable of it or they are not, with few exceptions. So if I had it my way, a violent rape would come with a life sentence. But that would almost guarantee all rape victims would be killed, as you would take away all incentive for the rapist to leave his victim, an eyewitness, alive. But I would like to see a minimum sentence for a crime like rape, sexual assault of 8 to 10 years. And I would like to see those and all violent criminal sentences to be mandatory. Meaning, if you are sentenced to 10 years in jail, that you will spend a minimum of 10 years in jail, no matter what, good behavior or not. Emphasize in jail there. Basically, I want all violent criminals to know that they will get what they will get if they commit violent crimes. Comma. And are caught. That if a man rapes a woman, he knows that he will get, as a minimum sentence, he knows what he will get as a minimum sentence, and he knows he will under no circumstances get less than that sentence. I sincerely believe that there are cases where criminals feel freer to commit more serious crimes because they assume that they will, if they are caught, get light sentences after all the proceedings, technicalities, good behavior clauses are worked into their sentence. And they're probably right. I don't think this would stop most serious violent crimes, but it might stop a few. I am not saying the criminals should not be rehabilitated. Yeah, rehabilitated. Of course they should if they are going to be let out one day. But this rehabilitation must not lessen the severity of the sentence for that criminal in any way. And that's it. That's my medium 6. I will then read I will end of this part, and then I'll read my small 8 in the next part. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.